Okay, so welcome to this talk. It's called Lazy Loading Content for Better Performance, User Experience and SEO, Search Engine Optimization. My name is Nacho Diaz. I work at the ICT, which is the UN Office of Information and Communications Technology, which has a base here in Valencia, in Spain. I'm Spanish. Those are my handles if you want to search me in Drupal, Twitter, etc. And first of all, I wanted just to introduce which topics we will be covering so that you might self-assess if maybe this talk is not what you expected and you want to go to another one. Feel free. I won't be angry, I promise. So mainly we will be talking about the page cache and the dynamic page cache. We will be discussing lazy builders and placeholders and auto placeholdering and the BigPipe module. And we will be talking about how they affect the Cumulative Layout Shift, largest contentful paint, performance, and perceived performance, which are not the same. Okay, and this is going to be a rather technical talk, and the main reason is going to be more like a state of the art. I won't propose something new, like new modules or new techniques, but rather my idea was to these things that I think in my experience as a Drupal developer have always been kind of separate things, and I didn't fully grasp it how they interacted with each other. For example, before this talk, I thought that placeholders were a BigPipe concept, and they are not, for example. So we will be discussing all of this in this talk. And first of all, I wanted to just, as a quick introduction, to talk about which is the link between the performance and the user experience and the search engine optimization. And we need to talk about the core web vitals. So these are indicators developed by Google, which the three main ones are these, and they measure speed, page speed loading, which is the LCP, largest contentful paint, interactivity, and visual stability. Two of them, the first two ones, especially the first one, the LCP, are closely related to performance, to our web performance. And the third one can be affected by the decisions we make to improve performance. We will talk about this later. And also it's important to know that other web vitals that exist, like the time to first byte and the first contentful byte, are also closely related to performance. So you can find more information about this on the web dev page. And they are taken into account by search engines as of now. So if you go find the information about Google, Google will tell you, and Google powers roughly 90% of the search engine of the searches, that core web vitals are used by the ranking system. So a bad score on core web vitals is actually hurting your search engine optimization. And the other ones, they take into consideration generic site speed. They do not refer directly to web vitals, but site speed, as we know, means performance as well. And if you go to the documentation of Google and see what Google is recommending, Google is going to talk a lot about cache. Okay? During this talk, we will be talking about application cache, about Drupal cache. We won't be talking about other things like browser cache, reverse proxies, etc. Okay? But Google is recommending that you cache everything as much as you can. We know the cache is recommended. We know the cache is great for many reasons. It saves time for your users. This means better user experience. It also saves carbon emissions for the planet. I think this is important. We have a duty also as developers to create websites and applications that are performant, not only for the sake of it, but also because they are better, they consume less energy. It makes the search engines happy, as we said. Google is taking into account web vitals, and also it makes your web more inclusive. We need to think also there's people with poor connections and old devices, and they will also benefit from your page being more performant. And just also as a part of the introduction, we need to talk about what are the cache problems that Drupal and in general every application has. So mainly there's two problems that we will discuss. Okay, the first one is that it just takes a single miss to invalidate your whole page in the page cache systems. So this means that you may have a perfectly cached page and just a single item that is getting invalidated too soon, maybe because it changes at a different pace. And this has heavy implications for performance because, as you know, and if you don't know, the cache bubble, the cache tags, and the cache context bubble up to the page. So at the end, your page will be as weak as its weakest part, okay? The thing that first loses its cache will kind of infect the whole page. A good example is the list cache tags, the node list, user list. Those are cache tags that can get invalidated a lot. For example, if you have a lot of nodes, a lot of content in your, if you have a content-heavy site. The second problem is that some cache contents have a huge cardinality. If you render the site name, this is global. Okay, so when it gets stored on the cache, on the database, it's just one hit. But if you have the username, you will know that you can have as many possible variations as users. And this can become a problem, not of invalidation, but of database performance. Cache content can grow exponentially as well. You don't need to have a lot of users because if you start interrelating several cache contexts, you can, for example, if you have two contexts, you might potentially have need a cache entry for every possible combination that you have. So it's been actually very easy to make your page almost uncacheable. If you depend on the tags that are too generic or are getting invalidated, are losing, are expiring too soon, or if you miss several contexts, or if you have a max age, short max age scenario, which is rare but can exist, you might be losing your whole page each time a single item on your page loses this. And the problem is deeply ingrained in Drupal because we have many contexts, for example, that like the user, the session, or the cookies, and even, for example, the languages, if your page has a lot of languages, which can introduce a lot of variation. And this always has meant that especially logged-in users have had a huge change of having problems. In fact, in Drupal 7, we didn't have cache for the logged-in users. So what's the proposal Drupal has made for this? The placeholders, okay, is this idea, placeholders and lazy builders is this idea of a placeholder is a substitute of a part of the page, usually the part of the page that is highly dynamic, that will be rendered later. We will define what later means later. And it's closely related to lazy builders, because a lazy builder indicates how to render this placeholder, but they are not the same. This is important to know. Also, placeholders need a strategy to be rendered. So we have three things here: the placeholder, the lazy builder, and the strategy. They work together, but they are not the same. Let's start by the simplest one, which is the lazy builder, okay? Declaring a lazy builder, it's very easy. And it's basically a callback. Instead of rendering your markup, for example, if we imagine this piece of code, we put a lazy builder which references a method or a function that will be called to build, actually give the render array results, okay? And then the rest of the render array is as usual. You have the cache, the max age in the original render array. So lazy builder is just the instructions on how this render array can be built, okay? Drupal gives you lazy builders for free. You have been using lazy builders without noticing, maybe, because lazy builders are mandatory for placeholders to work. If you go to the code, you will find this method, for example, that says, can create placeholder depends on the render array having a lazy builder. So, in order to magically enable placeholdering, Drupal core has been implementing lazy builders for you, maybe without you noticing, okay? So this enables a great out-of-the-box experience because we have placeholders and we have lazy builders without knowing. We are benefiting from this. But somewhat this has hidden the inner workings from the developer side. So it's, for me, for example, has been quite a long ride until I have been kind of able to understand how this works and able to consciously use it in my advantage. Why is this? Let's take this, for example. This is the block view builder, okay? All block entities are going through this. And all block entities, all the blocks on your Drupal instances are actually wrapped inside of a lazy builder, except from two. You can see the condition, the if, else, okay? Here is the wrapper. Exceptions are the main content and the title, but every other block on your site is being wrapped in a lazy builder. So now, if lazy builders express the how this placeholder is going to be rendered, that's one thing. We need other thing, which is who decides what is going to be placeholder. Two separate things. And we have two sources of placeholders. One is Drupal using the auto placeholdering conditions on services.yaml. This is on your services.yaml, okay? And it's basically max age, context, and tags. And those are the defaults. Those are the conditions that Drupal by default considers that make something so difficult to cache because it has a max age of 0 or because it has contexts that have too many variations. That should be placeholder. And this means that when the renderer of Drupal goes through all of your render arrays, if it finds a lazy builder and cache information that meets this criteria, you will get a placeholder, always. This is in the core. This doesn't depend on the cache modules or on the BigPipe. This happens always, okay? The second source of placeholders is you, because you can either identify extra conditions to add to these auto placeholder conditions. You can introduce your context, your tags. You can change the max age in order to affect different parts of your page. Or you can even manually indicate that you want a placeholder, okay? If you put in a render array a lazy builder, because remember, we need two things. If you put a lazy builder and the create placeholder set to true, this will create a placeholder for you no matter what are the auto placeholder conditions. So these are some examples from the core, so you can see that they are actually in use. These are examples from the core, and these are modules in the core in which they have considered that some part of some render array, like for example the links on the comments, maybe they were too dynamic, and they put a lazy builder and a create placeholder too. So you can see that this is actually in use, so you can benefit from this also in your modules or on your developments. So what shape takes a placeholder? So now we have the render array, we have the lazy builder, but what does Drupal do with this information? It creates a new render array which is made of two parts. The placeholder itself, which is just a markup with some information, and in the attached object, render array, in the attached with the same attached that we use for libraries, etc., there is a placeholder central with the information on how to replace it. So this is what happens with your render array. Then you have the markup first, and then you have attached placeholders, the same markup, and the lazy builder and the cache information. This is important. The cache information has been moved inside of the attached, okay? So at this stage, placeholders are mainly a potential. They need to interact with all the Drupal systems. Somebody has to come and use the information to render the placeholder, especially the cache systems and BigPipe, as we will see. And placeholders, you also need to know that need a strategy to be rendered. The single flash strategy is the default, which is in core, okay? And it's rendering the placeholders in an event subscriber after HTML response subscriber, okay? And it's blocking, meaning that you make a request and this needs to happen. So this is why other modules like BigPipe change this. We will talk about this in a second, okay? So we have these three things: lazy builders, placeholders, and strategies. And I know this is too much information, so now we will be seeing how this interacts with the cache systems. Okay, let's put all of this together with an example. We will be enabling these modules, page cache, dynamic page cache, BigPipe, and we will see what happens, okay? We will use a time block, okay? We will construct a time block, which is basically the same example that has a max age of 60 seconds. This is too low a max age, and if we don't placeholder this block, it will affect the whole page, and we will make our whole page re-render each 60 seconds. So we want this to be placeholdered, okay? Since this is a block, as we said before, our block is already wrapped inside a lazy builder, so the only thing we need to make a placeholder for this block is, for example, to go to the max auto placeholder conditions and raise the max age to, let's say, 90 seconds. So our block is under this. It will be get placeholdered. And then, in the case one, if we have everything disabled, page cache, dynamic page cache, BigPipe, etc., what happens is, this is, of course, the worst case. So the block is getting placeholder. This is important to know. You are getting a placeholder for the block, okay? But this is only serving to add additional processing. But what is happening is that you get a request to the page, the renderer placeholders the block, and then the single flash strategy we said before takes the placeholder and uses the lazy builder to get the actual results. It's doing nothing, okay? And the cache tags, context, and max age, they may bubble up to the page, but there is no page cache to use them. So the page is re-rendered each time. We are doing nothing in this case, okay? We have the render cache to say thanks, because at least the block is getting cache entry in the render cache, and the expire, for example, the expire timestamp, it's 60 seconds. So at least in the second hit of the page, in the second miss of the page, because it's always a miss, but the second time at least it will rescue the cached block from here. But this is not very useful, okay? And there is no difference between session and sessionless users. I won't be talking about logged in anonymous users, because an anonymous user can have a session, for example, if you have a cart on an e-commerce site. So let's enable the page cache, okay, for sessionless requests. The page cache module is going to introduce some improvements. It's going to store the full page on the first cache miss, and it's going to retrieve the full page from the database on the next hits, in the subsequent hits, okay? So for sessionless users, we will not have uncacheable pages anymore, okay? Users with a session have the same problems as before. We have introduced two problems. The first one is that page cache has a long-standing issue where max age is not bubbling up to the page, it's ignored. You can see, for example, here in the tests I made that the expire should be 60 seconds, it's not. By the way, you have cache control override. It's a module that you can do around this issue, because this has been a long-standing issue that is not been solved yet. And also, this means that we have lost the time block right now for sessionless users, and also the placeholders, we haven't seen their potential yet, because the page cache is storing on the database the full output of the page. So we are in the same scenario. A cache miss, a request, placeholders get created, then placeholders get replaced, then the final result of the HTML is stored on the cache. Not very useful yet. Enter dynamic page cache, things are going to start to improve now. Now, dynamic page cache is able to do a difference, to tell the difference between the highly dynamic parts that are going to be placeholder and the blue parts, okay? So now, for session users, okay, when we have a miss, it's going to store the result, the full page, with the placeholders, okay? And when it retrieves the page from the dynamic page cache, it's going to retrieve this page with the placeholders, and then it's going to replace the placeholders. We will have almost never uncacheable pages. We will usually have hits. And if we go, for example, to our block, if we hit a page and we log into the database, we will see that this is the structure that's getting stored in the database cache, okay? This Drupal rendered placeholder that has the callback, the arguments, and a token to identify it. Now, this is important to understand how this works. I have said before that almost never should a page be uncacheable. So this is the magic trick that dynamic page cache is doing. If we look at the code, we see that with page cache, you have either a miss or a hit. With dynamic page cache, if you go to the code, you can find that you can have a hit, a miss, or uncacheable pages, okay? How is this possible? Because the code says, if any of the auto placeholdering conditions is met on the page, the response is uncacheable. So for example, max age 0, if there is only max age of 0 or a context of session of user, your page should be considered as uncacheable. But, and this is the power of the placeholders, at this point, Drupal has already removed all of those parts, and they have become placeholders. So they are not present on the page. They are not present. If you have a max age of 0 on a placeholder, it has removed this information, because this information is now on the attached part of the placeholder. So this is also a point to hunt for performance issues. If you see this header on your page with dynamic page cache, it means that something that should have been placeholder has not been. So by removing this highly dynamic part from the cache HTML, we are increasing the ratio of hits. And also, the last thing that we are missing is that we are still using the single flash strategy, which is blocking, which is retrieving the page from the cache and then replacing the placeholders on the same request. So the only thing that we are missing is another strategy, a better strategy for placeholders, and this is BigPipe. So when we enable BigPipe, what we are changing is just on a cache hit, when it retrieves a page from the dynamic cache, it streams the response to the browser with information to lazily replace the placeholders in the browser, client side, okay? So now, BigPipe will send to the server an HTML with something that is very similar to the placeholders we sent before on the database, which are a span with all the information, okay? BigPipe has two strategies, with or without JS, okay? It's sent in chunks, and the response is divided in 3 parts. So it's this one, okay? Usually it's this one with BigPipe. The first part, the first chunk, is an stream response, so the browser is going to receive it like as a stream. The first part is the entire page with the placeholders, the span, until the closing body tag. Then there is a replacement value for each placeholder, which is a script that will be the script that will replace each one of the placeholders on the page, and then the closing body tag and everything after it. And this means that the first chunk of the page is already loaded when replacements are entering, okay? And usually, this is the cache hit from the dynamic page cache with the placeholders in place. So this is incredible for perceived performance because actually, the blue parts of the page are actually visible to the user before the red parts enter, okay? It's amazing for performance in general, but this can be hurtful for the third one, the cumulative layout shift. And this is less common, but also can hurt your LCP, your largest contentful pane, okay? So some problems were solved, especially performance issues, but some problems can be introduced. So the most important part of this is, now that you know how this works, how can you take control and improve your results on your page by making conscious decisions when it comes to placeholdering and cache, etc. The first one is, against the cumulative layout shifts, we have placeholdering previews, okay? This is rather new. Well, let's first see the problem with CLS. The problem with cumulative layout shift is that lazy rendering parts of the page can cause reflows and repaints and moving parts. You have the cached part, the blue one that came in the first chunk, and then the placeholder enters, is loaded. It was there before because it was an empty span, but then it gets loaded and then it moves around the other parts. And this is exactly what cumulative layout shift is penalizing, okay? This is what cumulative layout shift doesn't want to happen. So we have placeholder previews since February of the past year, okay? And it can't get any easier. It's another option you can add when you have a lazy builder, and it's just the render array that will take place of the actual content until it gets loaded. You can directly write a render array, or you can even use the template suggestions. There are template suggestions for the previews. There's a template, BigPipe interface preview, and usually it takes the name of the block or whatever is rendering it. So you need to check the source of the page, because if you go to the inspector, you won't see it because it will be replaced by the BigPipe. But if you go to the source of your pages, you will see that for each one of your placeholders, there is an interface preview you can use. So you can build alternative UIs. For example, in this block, you can build, I don't know, a gray area with a spinner. This is not perfect. For example, this one could be improved if instead of lazy loading the whole block, you lazy loaded only each one of the node titles, because they are more dynamic than the title and the string, okay? But you can take control with this and avoid, or at least decrease, the CLS problems, related problems. Second thing we can do, know your cache, know what you're doing, and adapt your settings and your code to your site specificities, okay? For example, what can happen with the largest contentful pane? The largest contentful pane is measuring What is for measuring speed is looking at the largest element on the page and seeing when it's loading, okay? If you happen to put your LCP inside, which can be, I don't know, a hero or a large image, etc. It depends. You have to look at your page, and you have tools that you can use. But if it happens to be inside of a placeholder, you might be having bad LCP results. So this is one thing to check, one action you can take. You can also spot for cache smells. We have talked about one before. Drupal dynamic cache and cacheable should be really strange, because as we said before, if all of your highly dynamic content has been already converted to placeholders, you shouldn't be seeing this header. So if you see this header, something has happened, okay? Of course, max age, if you see any max age 0, should be your last result even for placeholders, okay? And a big ratio of Drupal dynamic cache miss, we can see how can we check for this with a module now. A big ratio of this kind of headers, of this means that maybe there's something on your page that is asking for a placeholder, because something on your page is bubbling up and making you lose your cache too often. Another thing that I think we don't do that much is to adapt the auto placeholder conditions. How many of you have ever adapted this auto placeholder condition? Maybe 1, 2. Okay, so we usually stick with the Drupal defaults, which are really good. Max age 0. Okay, sounds pretty nice, but maybe if your site is content heavy, you might want to add the node list tag, because in a content heavy site where everybody is adding new nodes or editing nodes, each time you add or edit a new node, you can lose all of the cache entries that have a reference to the node list, which can be, for example, views, a lot of views. Or for example, if you only have a few mainly admin users, you might not need the user context. But if you have a lot of languages, you might need the context language added in order to help you. And also, you might not need everything that's here, okay? This is also an interesting thing. So if your page is only serving sessionless requests, you might have enough with page cache. Page cache, as you remember, is not using placeholders, but it's really quick because it's caching the whole HTML. So maybe you don't need placeholders at all if that is your case. Or under certain conditions, having only dynamic page cache can be beneficial, because when you have dynamic page cache and page cache together, dynamic page cache will be bypassed for sessionless users. So you will have kind of dynamic page cache for session and page cache for sessionless. If you disable page cache, dynamic page cache will be used for all of them. So maybe you don't need page cache. You can test. You can see if you get some improvements. And if you are not using dynamic page cache, BigPipe is usually of no use, so you can skip it. So you can optimize the strategies for your case. Another thing you can do is to take conscious control of your placeholders. This is interesting, I think. Okay, we have seen that in the core, there's many places where the developers have said, we need a placeholder here. So most of the placeholdering we are experiencing in Drupal is automatic and will take place inside of blocks, because but we have seen that the blocks are automatically wrapped inside a lazy builder. We can nevertheless always decide when can we opt in to placeholdering. So let's take an example. We have a controller that is returning a lot of static data, and then it has just a little piece of dynamic data, okay? For example, a random list of 3 nodes that has to expire every 3 minutes, and you say, okay, let's put a max age of 180, and it depends on the node list tag, which, as we said, can be problematic, okay? Is this. So we have a lot of things, a lot of content, which is highly static, and then a lot of highly dynamic content, and then a lot of content, which, again, maybe depends on something like config system side, but is. So the dynamic part is, if we put the cache tags at the controller level, the dynamics parts are kind of killing the other ones. So what you can do is you have the first part, whatever, and then the dynamic part, you use the lazy builder a lazy builder preview, for example, and use the create placeholder true and introduce the cache keys, max age, and tags there. That part will get placeholder because you asked Drupal specifically to do it by using the create placeholder true. Okay? If you do this, don't forget to put a key. You will usually need a key because a cache key, because when you are creating manually a placeholder, Drupal does not know about this structure that you created, so you will need a key in order to have also to benefit from the render cache. This is important. And to finish, some modules that you might want to add if you have to fight with all of this stuff, cache, core web vitals, improving performance, blah, blah, blah. There are some interesting models that I found during this talk. First one, thank you, David, for pointing this to me. We don't have many alternative strategies to BigPipe, but you can actually develop alternative strategies. A placeholder strategy is just a way to replace a placeholder. So Ajax BigPipe is an interesting module that uses intersection of server, because right now BigPipe is loading, I think it's loading everything at once. So if you have a placeholder at the bottom of the page, it's getting rendered when you hit the page. So this is interesting because it's waiting for the user using intersection of server API, which can kind of spy the scroll of the user and interact. It will wait for the block to actually enter the viewport. So this is kind of an interesting turn as a different strategy for rendering placeholders. You can extend BigPipe to sessionless requests. This is also an interesting module, which will, so as we said before, page cache is not using BigPipe, the page cache requests, the sessionless requests. So this means the first hit from, for example, an anonymous user, the first one is usually expensive. So what this module does is just accelerates the first request of a sessionless user using BigPipe, and then this response is cached, and then in subsequent request is returned by the page cache directly. It's an interesting addition as well. You can make your life much easier by using this module if you have to debug cache. I found this to be very interesting, the cache review module. It's ugly, but it will wrap everything on your page, indicating which parts of your page come from the cache, which parts have been comes from a lazy builder, which is the L, and it will also indicate which parts have come from a lazy builder and an auto placeholder, like this one below, which has the C with the italics. So this is a really great model for debugging cache issues. We have the BigPipe demo, which is also interesting. It allows you to demonstrate BigPipe. You can turn it on and off, and for example, check for do some testing on page loads, etc. And it also allows you to start a session as an anonymous user, which is interesting, for example, because if you are an anonymous user without a session, you will be served by page cache. If you start a session, you will be served by dynamic page cache and BigPipe. And also you can use the cache metrics, which will log cache invalidations. It can integrate with New Relic, but for example, this is very interesting to identify those cache tags that are getting invalidated too often. And when you identify them, you can add them to the auto placeholder conditions and benefit as well from all of the previews. So that was quite a lot. Thank you very much. This is it. Of course, don't forget about the contribution opportunities. We're almost at the end of these amazing conferences. And if you want to let me know what did you think, if that was too much information, etc. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or doubts, feel free to ask. Can you go to the mic, please?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering because my website is hosted on Acquia. Mm-hmm. So we are the billing is on page views. So I was wondering, is placeholder considered as a Drupal call? Is it centralized, or is it each placeholder is one Drupal call, so it's one page views? So
I don't have the slightest idea on how do they count, but for example, if they are counting requests, yes, each placeholder, if you use BigPipe, is a request because it's being loaded via JavaScript, which is calling a Drupal in order to ask, please, can you render me this? So it's a separate request. So if you are getting, if that is considered a page view, it will count. In this case, you can also, an important thing to know is that you can disable BigPipe if this was an issue. And even if the single flash strategy is not as good as BigPipe, it's still good because at least you will retrieve like 80, the blue parts from the database, that will be a cache hit, and then it will be get replaced by the single flash strategy. It's not as good as BigPipe, but still is better than
So
having no cache
it's
at
gonna
all.
make one call instead of
And that will be one call, for example.
one
If you don't
call
have
for each
BigPipe,
placeholders. Okay.
if you don't have BigPipe, that will be one call, one request, but you will get the power of placeholders the same.
Okay. Even if I have like 15 placeholders,
Yes.
it will be one call.
Yeah. If you disable BigPipe, it will be one call. The only problem is that it will be a blocking request. What you lose if you do that, you have all the cache benefits, but you will lose will be this experience, this perceived performance improvement, where the people can see the page after it has been fully loaded.
Like asynchronous. Like it's with BigPipe, it's asynchronous. The way they.
Yeah, BigPipe is kind of asynchronous. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because as we said before, it's sent in 3 chunks. So when the placeholders enter the page, are sent to the browser, the whole the part that was cached is already present on the browser. So it's kind of asynchronous. It feels like asynchronous.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, thank you very much. And